For most of us, love is a choice, an act of passion, of tenderness, of something beautifully human. But in ancient Sparta, love was erased. Desire was not a matter of the heart. It was a command. Every act of intimacy, every child conceived, served one purpose only: to forge the deadliest army the world had ever seen. To the Spartans, people were not born. They were manufactured. And the assembly line began not in the forge of war, but in the bedchamber. Behind the legend of the red-cloaked heroes and noble sacrifice at Thermopylae lay a system so cold and mechanical it would chill even the harshest tyrant. The state owned the body, the womb, the bloodline. Nothing belonged to the individual, not even the right to love. Marriage was not a matter of hearts, but of measurements. Elders, scarred men who had survived countless wars, served as matchmakers. They inspected young men and women as if they were livestock at auction, testing muscles, measuring shoulders, studying symmetry. He was tall, broad-shouldered, descended from warriors. She was strong-hipped, her frame built to survive childbirth. Beauty mattered only as proof of health. Health meant purity of blood. Each pairing was a calculated move in a human breeding program designed to produce perfection, not in mind or spirit, but in flesh. There were no vows of love, no tenderness. A Spartan marriage was a transaction between citizens and the state. The union's only sacred purpose was to bear the next generation of weapons, children molded from birth for discipline, obedience, and strength. And the women, the so-called mothers of Sparta, were stripped of choice even more cruelly. They were not nurturers, not keepers of the hearth. They were instruments of the nation's survival. From childhood, Spartan girls trained beside the boys, running, wrestling, throwing javelins, not to fight, but to harden their bodies for one destiny: to endure childbirth. They learned early that their battlefield was not the field of war, but the birthing bed. The cry of a newborn was their victory, and the cost of that victory was their humanity. They were told their greatest glory was not love, not happiness, but to give life to a perfect soldier, to bleed, to suffer, and to endure for the machine that was Sparta. And so, beneath the golden sun of Laconia, the state began its most ruthless creation, not of cities or empires, but of human weapons, born not of love, but of command. The Spartan obsession with perfection did not end with pairing strong bodies. It reached into darker realms of control. What if a soldier's wife could not bear a child? What if her offspring came weak, frail, or unfit for war? To Sparta, there was no tragedy in this, only inefficiency. A strong warrior could be commanded to impregnate another man's wife. It was not considered betrayal, but civic duty. A woman's womb belonged to the state. If her husband was old or unworthy, she would lie with another man chosen for his strength, and her husband would agree, proud to serve Sparta's bloodline. Love and loyalty, the foundations of most civilizations, were crushed beneath the boots of state eugenics. The mission was clear: not happiness, not affection, only the perfection of the bloodline. When a child was finally born, celebration was forbidden. Joy was replaced with fear, for every newborn faced a test of survival. The baby was taken from its mother's arms to a place called Lesh, the Hall of Judgment. There the Gerousia, a council of aged warriors scarred by decades of battle, awaited in silence. Their eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the trembling infant, as if inspecting a weapon fresh from the forge. They measured its limbs. They listened to its cry. They bent its spine, examined its joints, watched for any sign of weakness. And if a flaw was found, a limp, a deformity, a feeble voice, the verdict was swift and merciless. To the Spartans, weakness was contagion, a threat not only to the child but to the survival of the state itself. Those deemed unfit were not slain by sword or suffocated in secrecy. They were taken to the Apothete, a desolate cliff on Mount Taygetus. There, beneath the silent moon and biting wind, the infant was left to die, its cries swallowed by darkness. This was not murder, the elders said. It was nature correcting itself. What was born imperfect must return to the earth. Those who survived this brutal selection were no longer children. They were possessions. Their lives belonged to Sparta, their fates sealed before their first breath. And so, through cold calculation and ritual cruelty, the state of Sparta refined its most terrifying weapon, the human being itself. Every heartbeat was engineered, every birth a political act. The machinery of perfection was in motion, one that would one day devour the very world it sought to control. From the moment a Spartan child survived the judgment of the elders, his life became a march toward war. There were no choices left, only orders. In Sparta, even the act of living was a duty to the state. Procreation was not a right, it was an obligation. Long before the word eugenics existed, the Spartans practiced it with ruthless precision. They believed that humankind could be purified, refined like iron in a furnace, until only perfection remained. Men lived apart from their wives, confined to the barracks from age 7 to 30. They were soldiers before they were husbands, weapons before they were fathers. A man's truest marriage was to the state, and his only devotion was to discipline. To remain single was not merely shameful, it was treason. Those who refused to marry were paraded naked through the streets, mocked and humiliated before their fellow citizens. The message was clear. Sparta owned your body, your will, your bloodline. At the age of 7, every boy was taken from his mother's arms and surrendered to the agogé, a machine of education and suffering designed to break and rebuild the human spirit. The child no longer belonged to his parents. He belonged to Sparta. His world became a cold barracks of stone and torchlight. His bed was a pile of reeds torn by hand from the riverbank, his clothing a single rough tunic worn through both summer and winter. Comfort was forbidden, warmth was weakness, hunger was his teacher. The boys were starved on purpose, to sharpen their instincts. They were ordered to steal food to survive, not punished for theft but for being caught. Failure meant flogging, not for immorality but for incompetence. The lesson was cruel and brilliant. Success justified everything. If you succeeded, you were right. If you failed, you deserved pain. The line between right and wrong was erased. Only efficiency mattered. The agogé did not raise children. It manufactured predators, minds sharpened to blades, hearts emptied of softness. A Spartan boy learned early that mercy was poison, empathy a disease. Each scar, each lash, each night of hunger was part of a transformation, the forging of flesh into iron. And as he lay awake under the cold Spartan stars, the boy understood his destiny. He was no longer human. He was the property of the state, a tool of perfection, a weapon waiting to be used. In the agogé, the body was merely the beginning. The real war, the one that decided who would become a true Spartan, was fought inside the mind. After the boys learned to endure hunger, cold, and pain, they faced something far more brutal, the art of silence. In Laconia, words were not for comfort or curiosity. They were weapons, sharp, precise, deadly. To speak foolishly was to expose weakness. To speak too much was to invite punishment. Our very word laconic comes from this discipline, born from a people who believed that speech should cut like a blade. Inside the training hall, silence was law. A boy who babbled or questioned without purpose might feel the instructor's bite on his hand. A small, shocking reminder that restraint was more powerful than words. Every question from an elder was a trap. Who is the bravest man in Sparta? Is theft honorable? What do you think of the king's last campaign? Each answer risked humiliation or worse. The boys learned to think faster than fear, to hide their thoughts behind blank faces. Over them ruled the Irenes, older trainees who acted as both mentors and tormentors. They mocked, provoked, and punished the younger boys with state approval. Meals were ambushes of the tongue. Conversation was warfare. A careless phrase, a moment's hesitation, and the lash followed. This was not random cruelty. It was calculated indoctrination, a test of who could survive interrogation, who could mask emotion under agony. They learned to trust no one, to expose weakness in others while burying their own. Every friendship was fragile, every word a risk, and when the mind had been stripped bare, when pain had become normal, came the final ordeal, the trial at the altar of Artemis Orthia. It looked like a ritual, but it was pure horror disguised as faith. Cheeses were placed on the altar, and the boys were ordered to seize them while men with whips guarded the path. Leather cracked through the air. Flesh split, but they could not scream. To cry out was to fail. Those who endured in silence, even as blood streaked the marble floor, were honored. Some died standing, their faces twisted not in pain but in pride. They had been baptized in blood, reborn not as sons but as symbols of Sparta's perfection. The agoge had taken their bodies, broken their minds, and reforged them into something colder than steel, men who no longer knew mercy. The agoge was never meant to be the end. It was merely the forging process, and what came next would shape the steel into a weapon. From the ranks of the hardened graduates, the strongest, most cunning, and most silent were chosen for something darker, the crypteia. To outsiders it was a mystery, whispered of but never confirmed. To Spartans it was a sacred horror, a secret brotherhood of death. Each year the Spartan government declared an official war, not on rival cities, but on their own enslaved population, the Helots. This declaration was not for conquest, but for legality. Once the war was proclaimed, murder became sanctioned duty. At night, the chosen young men vanished from the barracks armed with nothing but a dagger and a few scraps of food. By day they hid in the hills and reeds. By night they descended upon the countryside. Their mission was simple but monstrous, to hunt the Helots. But not all of them. Only the boldest, the strongest, the ones who might one day rebel or inspire hope. This was not combat. It was purge, a psychological ritual, a test of how deeply the agoge's lessons had sunk in. The young killers were not told to hate. Hatred would mean emotion. They were taught to kill with emptiness, with obedience as their only instinct. It was said that a true graduate of the crypteia could slit a man's throat and sleep soundly beneath the same stars. He did not kill for rage, glory, or vengeance. He killed because the state commanded it. The mountains of Laconia became silent witnesses to this yearly cleansing. Red soil, dark rivers, and the rustle of cloaks through the night. Helots disappeared by the dozens, their names never spoken again. By dawn, the chosen Spartans would return to the city unseen. No celebrations awaited them. No honor was given. Only silence, the silence of a task fulfilled. For Sparta, this was not cruelty for its own sake. It was control. A reminder to the Helots that rebellion meant death, unseen and unpunished, and a reminder to the young warriors that mercy was treason. By the time their blades were bloodied, the transformation was complete. The boy who once trembled beneath the whip was gone. In his place stood something colder. A man without conscience, without fear, without self. He was no longer flesh and heart. He was the weapon Sparta had been waiting for. By the age of 30, a Spartan man had earned what the world might call freedom. But in Sparta there was no such thing. He had survived the agoge, endured the crypteia, and now faced a duty colder and quieter than war, to reproduce. His bride was not chosen by affection or chance. She was chosen by decree. The pairing was a command of the state, the final stage in the machinery of perfection. And she was no fragile bride waiting to be rescued. She was his mirror, strong, scarred by training, and loyal not to him but to Sparta. Spartan women were not victims of their world. They were its iron foundation. While men waged war, women managed everything else: the estates, the slaves, the discipline of daily life. They were taught that their value was not measured in beauty or kindness, but in the strength of the sons they raised. Their hearts were not soft. Their words were sharp as bronze. To their children they spoke only one command: return with your shield or on it. They were not mourning mothers, but guardians of ideology, ensuring that weakness never returned to Sparta. Even marriage itself was stripped of tenderness. It was not love. It was a ritual of control. A man was expected to seize his bride under nightfall, an ancient custom meant to keep desire without affection. Her hair was cut short, her form cloaked like a man's, her eyes meeting his in silence. There was no courtship, no ceremony, no warmth. He came to her secretly, briefly, fulfilling his civic duty under the dim glow of oil lamps. Before sunrise he was gone, back to the barracks, back to the army. Their meetings remained rare and hidden, engineered to ignite desire but smother attachment. Love was weakness. Attachment was betrayal. The state did not need lovers. It needed creators, manufacturers of soldiers. The womb was not a sanctuary of life. It was a forge, and the woman the smith. And yet within this machine of discipline, Spartan women held a terrifying kind of power. They commanded their households like generals. They spoke their minds in public assemblies. Even philosophers from other Greek cities whispered of their confidence and ferocity. For in Sparta, A woman's tenderness was forged into steel, her love into loyalty. She was not wife nor mother, but something the ancient world had never seen before, the architect of a warrior race. For centuries, the Spartan machine functioned flawlessly. Its gears of discipline and blood churned without mercy, producing a society of warriors so precise, so relentless, that Greece itself trembled beneath their step. They were gods of endurance, avatars of control. But beneath that shining bronze armor, the first cracks had already begun to form. The same system that made Sparta invincible would also doom it. Their obsession with purity, their ruthless breeding laws and selective deaths, had forged a bloodline too narrow to survive the centuries. Every Spartan soldier was a masterpiece of discipline, yes, but also irreplaceable. When one fell, he took generations of perfection with him. While other cities could replenish their armies with fresh recruits, Sparta's ranks thinned with every victory. They had built a cage of excellence and locked themselves inside, but numbers alone did not destroy them. It was the mind that failed next. For in their pursuit of obedience, the Spartans had sacrificed imagination. The agoge produced soldiers who could endure any hardship, but not men who could question, adapt, or create. Their strength was frozen in time, unable to evolve with the world around them. Then came the test. Lurked. 371 BCE. The Theban general Epaminondas faced the Spartan phalanx, the most feared formation in history. For centuries it had crushed every foe, row upon row of unbroken shields and spears. But Epaminondas saw what others could not: perfection's weakness. He concentrated his forces on one side, 50 men deep, and drove straight into the Spartan right wing, where the king himself commanded. It was a move the Spartans had never seen, never conceived. Their flawless order collapsed in minutes. Their formation, the symbol of their invincibility, splintered like glass beneath a hammer of innovation. And there, on that blood-soaked plain, for the first time in living memory, a Spartan king fell. His crimson cloak, once the mark of divine authority, lay trampled in the mud. The unbreakable had been broken. When the dust settled, the myth of Spartan supremacy was gone. The world had moved forward, and Sparta, trapped by its own design, had not. Their discipline had become their disease, their perfection their poison. The empire that once ruled through fear now stood hollow, haunted by the echo of its own marching feet. A civilization so flawless it had forgotten how to live. Victory should have been Sparta's triumph, the proof that its brutal discipline, its merciless system had forged a civilization destined to last forever. But in victory they found death. The same gold that had once bought their survival now poisoned their spirit. Persian tribute, once a tool of war, became a river of corruption. Wealth slipped into Spartan hands like a silent infection, eating away at the iron code that had bound the city for centuries. The warriors who had lived by austerity now dined in luxury. The laws of Lycurgus, once carved into their souls, were reduced to memory. Discipline turned to decadence. The very men who once trained under starvation and pain now sought comfort and pleasure. Their wives, once symbols of duty and honor, became emblems of wealth and vanity. And as gold flowed in, the bloodline thinned. Every soldier who fell on the battlefield left behind not heirs, but empty homes. Their perfection had made them rare, and their rarity had made them fragile. There were no sons strong enough to replace them, no new warriors. Molded in the fires of the agoge, the ranks of the Spartiate class, those full citizens who had once ruled Greece, collapsed to a handful. What remained was a ghost of a nation. Sparta, once the embodiment of strength, became a living museum, a shadow of its former terror. Roman travelers came not to fear the city, but to watch reenactments of its ancient rituals. The same punishments, the same endurance tests, performed now for spectacle, not for survival. The whips, the blood, the screams, all of it staged, hollow, meaningless. A people who once conquered through fear had become actors in their own legend. The system that had forged heroes had devoured its soul. Its rigid pursuit of perfection had stripped away every trace of humanity, until nothing remained but the echo of iron and the smell of smoke. Sparta's children no longer carried shields, they carried stories. And so, in their unyielding quest to build the flawless soldier, the Spartans had crafted their own extinction. They created men without mercy, Citizens without compassion, rulers without love. They had forged the perfect weapon and turned it upon themselves. When the fires of Sparta finally went out, no one wept. No enemy rejoiced. The world simply moved on, leaving behind the ashes of a glory so pure, so disciplined, and so blind that it destroyed everything it touched.